Hi there! Welcome back to another video on my channel. Today we'll be diving into another Writers Wednesdays. I know it's been a hot minute since I've had one. I was sick last week, but we're back. We're here, and we're going to do another Writers Wednesdays revolving around, I think, a pretty important theme in writing and media these days, and it is queer coding, but more specifically, queer coding villains. So if you're interested in this topic, just keep on watching. Okay, so I gotta pop on my glasses for y'all because I'm gonna take you to school. But yeah, queer coding. Oh, can you see in the reflection? Ooh, maybe I shouldn't, but like it's such a vibe. Maybe I'll pull them down like this and just look like a grandmother. Yes. Okay, so queer coding, my darlings. What is this? What is this? I tried to explain this to my husband. So just background. I am a beautiful, beautiful bisexual woman. I've been a bisexual woman all my life. But I think I didn't really have a coming out moment. I've had like gradual coming outs where it was like, in high school, I was part of Queer Straight Alliance, and I was like the president of a human rights group with other LGBTQ kids. And my friends knew, family didn't. And then later on in college, I came out to different members of my family, not all. But different members of my family. And then, so I guess if you're watching this now and I didn't talk to you about it, hello, I'm bisexual. But yeah, so, and then later I just started posting shit on my Facebook page or like my Instagram page, just general social media accounts about bisexual memes and things like that. So if you didn't get the hint before, hello, here it is. Bisexual. I am married to a heterosexual man. So a lot of times I find myself having to explain different aspects of like queer culture to my partner, which is fine because like, again, the same way we learn from each other, right? We just have different backgrounds in general. As you guys may know, my husband's from a different country and he's immigrating here, and we're going through that whole process. So we're constantly learning from each other all the time. Where either when it comes to culture, backgrounds, our own personal histories, that's just what we do. We learn and we grow, right? So yeah, so I've been trying to teach him a little bit more about like queer culture in general, and it's one of those things where you know. Of course, like you can send materials on like text and like history of the media and stuff like that, and I try to like help him out with that. But the other day we were talking about queer coded villains or queer coding in general in media, because I'm always the one that says, like, if we're watching a show or something, I'm like, that's a homosexual or that's a bisexual, and he's like, how do you know? And I'm like, I just know, it's queer coded. They said, he's like, yeah, but they're not out. It doesn't say it in the show. I said, nah, it's coded, right? So this is my attempt to explain queer coding to you guys. It's like just kind of not necessarily built on it's kind of built on stereotypes a lot of times. And stereotypes have a function in society that can be both good and bad, right? We use stereotypes as identifiers for different groups of people. We just do that naturally as human beings. But they can also build up into harmful stereotypes where you just assume that everybody of that certain background is the same. And that clearly isn't good. So when we talk about queer coding, it's not always in a necessarily negative way. Today I'm going to be talking about more negative aspects of queer coding. I think queer coding is important just to have queer representation, period, in different shows and books and everything like that. But it's one of those things that, at least personally, I can find frustrating because I would rather just have a story about queer people and not have to do guesswork to find out. But yeah, anyway, so this is like my long-winded intro. Sorry if I'm ranting, but let's try to organize this a bit more. So where does queer coding come from? What is queer coding? Why do we do it? Yeah, so basically, a lot of this, in at least American context, and like I'm coming from a very American perspective because I grew up in the US, is that like there's always been queerness in different mediums and art, depicting queerness in plenty of different ways. Like one of the first ever vampire novels was called Carmilla, and it's about lesbians. Because that is the scariest thing to men, is just lesbians. But again, I'm just joking. But so queerness has always been part of our culture in some way, shape, or form, whether it's being demonized or just kind of like there. I don't know. But in the US, I think around the 30s, there was a law that passed, and I don't remember the name. I'll put it up on screen, or I'll also be including videos in my video, like in the description down below, of people who've kind of covered this topic, or at least videos that I've watched who'd go into a more in-depth description of it, and I'll reference them there. But there's a law in the 30s that passed that made it so that sexual misconduct, or whatever that is, couldn't be shown on TV anymore because of like a Puritan culture, or they didn't want to like taint the minds of the youth. I don't know why. But you know, that included things like sex, drugs, drinking, like even I Love Lucy, like they weren't allowed to sleep in the same bed, you know what I mean? So that's what we're dealing with. So inherently, queerness of any kind was kind of pushed under this umbrella too, as being like illegal to show on TV. Gradually, that law got removed, probably in sometime around the 60s, and slowly with the sexual revolution and everything else, people started like bringing these ideas back and being like, hey, it's not that bad, this is what life looks like, let's be more realistic. And they started including things back on TV and movies that dealt with sex, drugs, alcohol, rock and roll. So it's important to note though that queerness wasn't necessarily as readily accepted as other elements under this law or other of these actions. And the only way you could really get away with showing queerness in film, TV, movies, books, whatever, is to demonize it. And so that's why you see around this time a lot of like interesting queer literature, or like queer villains. And I watched this one video, and again, I'm putting it down below, and the amount of like weird romantic fanfics of Satan sending a lesbian to seduce women or innocent women is just hilarious to me. I don't know. So queerness was actively demonized. The only way you could really show it or write it is if you incorporated it as a villain. So the way you would represent it, of course, it had to be different from straightness or the norm. So what does this look like? This looks like, and to be completely transparent, this is something that still continues on today, although not as in your face about it, but one of the biggest perpetrators of this ever is Disney. If you look at almost every single Disney villain, they are queer-coded in some form or another. So typically this comes in like if you have a male character or a masculine presenting character, they're going to adopt sassier feminine traits because gay. Likewise, if you have a female or female presenting character as the villain, she's going to be more sexually deviant because, you know, it's traditionally said that men are the ones that lust after women and not vice versa. So anytime you see a woman inherently like craving sex or sensuality or anything like that, like the femme fatale type thing, typically queerness is associated with them, not all the time. But likewise, just like women adopting more masculine characteristics, you know, in general. And I know this view is very limited because, of course, it still operates on the gender binary. Of course, people have different balances of masculine and feminine in them, and the way they choose to present masculinity and or femininity is completely up to them, you know. I consider myself pretty feminine presenting, but I've also gotten comments that I am a very masculine person, and like that's fine because my form of masculinity or what I present as masculinity is going to be different from person to person. So are we operating in a binary of gender? Yeah. Is that annoying? Yeah. But for the historical sake, let's just keep doing this. Okay. So gender roles, aka gay. That's basically where we need to get to this point. So that's kind of like an identifier, and that's more like coding for straights about like who's gay and who's not gay. Like if you look at Scar from The Lion King, I think he's a good example of like your tired, sassy gay uncle, right? Likewise, I've talked about this because I did a makeup of Ursula from The Little Mermaid on my channel a couple weeks ago, and Ursula's basically just a drag queen. I would argue the crab from Moana, the materialism of it, like basically a lot of negative traits like materialism, like power hungry people, flamboyancy, especially like gluttony, all that excess, right, is like negative stereotypes associated with like gay people from this time. Jafar, great example of a queer coded character, even though he like lusts after Jasmine or whatever. But yeah, basically almost every single Disney villain. And, it's funny because these are some of my favorite characters ever. I love villains, and I think a lot of queer people growing up related a lot to villains. Maleficent, oh my god, Maleficent's very much a queer-coded character, and in my opinion. I know the recent renditions of her make her out to be like a trauma survivor. But basically, the old crone without children stereotype can also be preferenced, because think about it, like, what does the traditional narrative look like? Like, what does the traditional heroic story looks like? It is about some young man with physical prowess or whatever it is goes out and rescues the damsel in distress, and her whole life changes when she meets this man, and they get married and live happily ever after, and it's assumed that they have babies or whatever, because gender roles, right? Because it is the man's job to go out and conquer and provide, and then the woman is meant to just reciprocate and cultivate whatever he brings to the table, whether that be family, like breeding or whatever. Yeah. But yeah, so that's queer coding for straights. I don't know if anybody else has really talked about this, but this is how I'm like labeling it. There's a difference between queer coding for straights and then queer coding for fellow LGBTQ folks. It's more subtle, but like sometimes I feel like it's built on like inside jokes within the queer community. I see this a lot as someone who's bisexual, because there's so many bisexual memes, it's not even funny. But like, the characters embracing those stereotypes, like the chick from Brooklyn Nine-Nine and like her leather jacket obsession or whatever. I mean, obviously later on she comes out as bi on the show. It's not a surprise. But she's clearly bisexual. Bisexual sit funny. That's another ongoing joke. Or my favorite, the fan theory that Bella from Twilight is a lesbian based on like the truck, the flannel, the overall annoyance. Like, it's hilarious. I'm sure there's plenty of other videos that do that. But yeah, so it's a difference. It's one of those things that, like, yeah, maybe in this culture, like, this isn't accepted or whatever, but there's still a way to queer code to subvert the social norm. So that's like a positive example of queer coding as opposed to the negative. And the reason, it's not saying that you can't have queer villains. We love a queer villain. I love that. But the problem is that when you only associate queerness with evil, that's what permeates people's brains. You know what I mean? That's what shapes their worldview. So they're being taught or indoctrinated to see that anything with any ounce of queerness is inherently seen as a negative thing. And that's why we're getting into like the problematic aspects of it, if that makes sense. It's just about representation as a whole. So the same way we want straight heroines, we need to have straight villains, and vice versa. If we have queer villains, we need to see some queer heroes going on. We need that diversity to show that this narrative isn't pushed that says queerness needs to be damned. Likewise, there's this other trope that I kind of wanted to bring up just a little bit, and it kind of goes along with the queer villain thing, kind of, but it's, and my husband actually brought this to my attention because he was, after I talked to him about queer coding and what that means, and how I actively try to look for that queer coding in whatever we're watching, and I'm almost annoying about it, but I do. It's like a hide and seek, but I told him, like, hey, this is a thing where a lot of villains are demonized based on perceived stereotypes within different sexualities. And so he was doing more research, and he was talking to me about this trope of, like, the gay person dying off, right? And if this is too triggering for you, like, please, like, if you want to click off the rest of this video, that's totally fine. Thank you for watching so far. But continuing on, there is this thing that happens in media and different, books and stuff where the openly gay character or even the queer-coded character dies because it's like a self-sacrificing gay thing. Like, I don't know why. Again, this is really problematic. I think the most recent example that I saw, and I'm just thinking about this because I literally finished this show the other day. It was in Squid Game. So there's only like one openly gay character in Squid Game, and he's like disgusting, just because he's like a horrible person. But it is the American bad guy with, I think he's like a panther mask or something. Yeah, so like he's the only openly, again, villain. He's the only openly gay character, right? But a lot of people argue that, I can't remember her name. I'm so sorry. But the female friend of, what was it, number 67? The girl with like the mullet bob. Right, the friend. Okay, so there was the girl from North Korea, the refugee, and then the other girl she meets during the marble game. Right, they barely know each other, but the way the friend looks at the female protagonist, like, okay. So this is a character that's very, very queer coded, right? Just the devotion to this female stranger she doesn't know, and again, sorry, spoilers. Click off if you want, but she ends up losing the game on purpose so that the other girl can live on, and she dies. And it's the sudden romance they're not allowed to show. Like, this is a Korean show. It's a Korean TV show, obviously. Sorry, I'm taking off my glasses just because, we're getting real here. This is a Korean TV show. I'm sure the culture around homosexuality is like different there, and I'm not sure how far it's progressing, if any. It's not my place to speak on, but having that representation, even queer coding, yeah, cool. Is it going to be perfect? Probably not, because they haven't, there's lots of nuances, right? Like, things we're learning every day. So I'm not being critical. I'm like not trying to be a hater on the show, because I found the show very entertaining. But like within the show, the only two queer characters fell into both of these tropes. That's just as harmful, because the queer friend dying off out of pure devotion is like just as harmful, because it perpetuates this narrative that queer folks are dispensable, and that is expected of them to die for the protagonist or whoever doesn't even really show interest in them, or even if they just die off randomly. Like, there's jokes in horror movie tropes that, like, any minority or queer person is going to get killed off right away. It's a bad joke, and I do see people, at least in U.S. media, actively trying to not do that in horror films, and reclaiming the narrative and having more people of color and queer folk be the main characters in horror films, at least, which I'm cool. I like that. I root for that. But again, it's like something we need to be actively aware of, and like unlearn these things and try to do better moving forward. And that's why I decided to make this video about queer coding, just because, or like queer coding villains, and I guess the sacrifices. I don't know what to call them, but yeah. So it's important to know, especially for people who aren't in the community that are writing queer characters into their works. It's really important to not perpetuate these tropes any further. Like I said, there's no shame in liking queer-coded villains. Some of the best queer-coded villains are what helped other people come out, right? Like, I can't tell you how many people have said that Shigo is what brought them out of the closet, like Shigo from Kim Possible, and like that's totally fair. Yeah, they served us. They helped us find these identifiers through these stereotypes. They people attached onto them because they saw somebody that mirrored themselves, even if it was just in a superficial way. But now that we have that, we have to analyze what's going on and try to move forward from that. And there's going to be some comments, I'm sure, that are like, oh, these aren't actually that harmful. You're being sensitive with blah 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 blah. Cool. Maybe not for you, but it's like just thinking about people as a whole and understanding that not everyone sees something and they're just kind of like, that's just fiction, right? For some people, this is their only exposure to people who are different from them. And that's like a whole theory about representation in media and books and shows and all that kind of stuff. I'm just going to tell you my favorite queer-coded villain, period, of all time is him from Powerpuff Girls. I fucks with him. I fuck with other Disney villains, queer-coded Disney villains. Hades, I fucks with him. I fucks with all of them, right? Cruella, I fucks with her too, or at least not the Cruella from the most recent movie. Let's not get that twisted, okay? That was trash. Trash. I'm talking about the first live action with this queen. I'll put her on stage. Yes, I fucks with her. But anyway, so yeah, I do enjoy this, but it's just kind of the thing where we have to analyze and figure out where we're moving on from this and what queer coding is going to look like in the future. Like I said, it's becoming a new thing. There is positive examples of queer coding. Luca is queer coded, and I will fight anybody on this. Period. This is a story about two fish boys that love each other very, very much. Okay. So yeah, just I hope this video basically. I know I'm ranting this whole time. I'm sorry. I'm just excited. I hope this helps you if you're interested in this topic. I didn't really get too dive deep into it. This is a very surface level video. I will share other people's videos that go way more into depth and pull way more sources than I did. This is just kind of like an introductory thing to like get people to think about or get people to consider. And I figured, you know, I'm a pretty friendly face. I can get you introduced into this topic before you like dive into it, you know. But yeah, so that was the point of this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. It fits in with October with villains and stuff. If you want, I'm going to be doing more Writers Wednesdays revolving around this theme, especially since I am somebody who writes in dark fantasy and is a little bit spooky too. And so this will be a consistent thing on the channel, hopefully even beyond the month of October, where we talk about like different aspects of writing, writing for scarier stuff specifically, but also just writing in general. So if you're interested in any of that, please subscribe to the channel. Please. That would really, really help me out. And until next time, thanks. Bye.